My daughter said I was a burden, so I turned her abandoned inn into a place she couldn't ignore. I never thought the cruelest words I'd hear would come from my own daughter. "Mom, you're a burden. I can't have you dragging me down anymore." The words cut sharper than any scalpel I ever held in 30 years as a nurse. I stood on her pristine porch overlooking Lake Champlain, clutching a battered suitcase in one hand and a folder of medical records in the other. Her house glowed like a magazine cover, white shutters, perfect landscaping, not a leaf out of place. And me, I was the flaw in her flawless picture, the shadow she wanted erased. Just a week before, a fire had gutted my small cottage on the edge of town. I lost everything, the photo albums, my mother's quilt, the letters I used to read on sleepless nights. With nowhere to go, I turned to Claire, my only child, the girl I once swaddled through storms and sickness, the one I thought would never turn me away. But the woman who opened that door wasn't the girl I raised. Her silk blouse was spotless, her voice clipped, her eyes colder than the lake in January. And when she closed the door, it wasn't just wood on hinges. It was 30 years of sacrifice, dismissed in a single breath. I stood there in the fading light, suitcase heavy, heart heavier, realizing something I never thought possible. I no longer had a home. The motel smelled of mildew and loneliness. The carpet was damp, the wallpaper peeled in strips, and the air conditioner rattled like it had given up years ago. I set my suitcase on the bed, the springs sagging as if even the furniture had lost hope. I told myself I wouldn't cry, not when I held strangers' hands as they took their last breath in the hospital, not when I worked double shifts on holidays, my daughter waiting at home with a frozen dinner, not even when my husband died too young, leaving me with a mortgage, a child, and grief too heavy to name. But that night, in that dim motel room, I wept. Hot, silent tears that wouldn't stop. Because for the first time in 70 years, I realized I wasn't just without a house. I was without a place in my own daughter's life. I thought back to the years that had shaped me into who I was. Claire was only 6 when her father died. I remember coming home from the funeral, taking off my black dress, and pulling on my scrubs. There was no time to collapse, not when a child needed dinner, not when bills were stacked on the kitchen table. I worked nights at the hospital and weekends giving private care to the elderly. I missed birthdays, recitals, Christmas mornings. But every dollar I earned went to Claire's shoes, Claire's textbooks, Claire's future. And she had thrived. Top of her class, college on a scholarship, later a career in tourism that lifted her into a world of boardrooms and perfect houses on the lake. I was proud, so proud. But somewhere along the way, each step she took up the ladder seemed to push me further down. Now, sitting in a room that smelled like mildew and regret, I understood the cruelest truth of all. In her eyes, I wasn't her mother anymore. I was just dead weight. The next morning, I couldn't stand the smell of mildew or the hum of the vending machine outside my motel door. I wandered through town with no real destination, just letting my feet carry me. That's when I found myself back on Maple Hill, the street where I had raised Claire. The houses looked older now, paint faded, porches sagging, but the memories clung to every corner. The elm tree at the corner still stood tall, the same tree where Claire once hung upside down until I nearly had a heart attack. The bakery still had its chipped red door, though the bell above it barely made a sound. And then I heard it, someone calling my name. "Margaret O'Donnell, Lord above, is that really you?" I turned, and there she was, Nora Keene, my old neighbor and closest friend from those hard years. Her hair was white now, tied in a bun, but her eyes still had the same spark that used to keep me sane when the nights felt endless. Before I could answer, she marched off her porch and pulled me into a hug that smelled of flour and coffee. For a moment, I let myself sink into it because it had been so long since anyone held me like I mattered. "You look like you've been through a storm," Nora said, studying my face. I tried to smile, but my voice cracked. I lost the house, and Claire, she doesn't want me around. She called me a burden, Nora, a burden. Her eyes sharpened, the same way they used to when she caught her boys skipping school. She shook her head hard. Don't you ever repeat that like it's gospel. You are the woman who kept this block alive, Margaret. You were patching wounds at the hospital, stitching dresses at midnight, and still showed up with soup when I was sick. You raised that girl on grit and love. You're not a burden, you just forgot your own worth. Her words cut through the fog I'd been drowning in. For the first time since the fire, I felt something stir in me. A memory of the woman I once was, the woman who had carried more than her share and never let it break her. Nora squeezed my arm, her voice low and steady. You've still got fight in you, Margaret. You just need to remember how to use it. I walked away from Maple Hill that afternoon with nothing in my pockets but something heavier in my chest. Hope. And maybe, just maybe, my story wasn't finished yet. That night back in the motel, I pulled the old tin box from the bottom of my suitcase, the one I hadn't opened in years. The hinges squeaked as I lifted the lid. Inside were decades of careful saving, small stacks of bills wrapped in rubber bands, a faded bank book with deposits I had scribbled in by hand, and a few envelopes from my nursing days labeled Rainy Fund. Coins, pension checks, even a little life insurance payout I had never touched. I ran my fingers over each note, remembering the nights I'd earned them. 12-hour shifts in the ER. Holiday weekends spent alone at the hospital while everyone else celebrated. Sewing uniforms after midnight to scrape together an extra $20. It wasn't much, not enough to impress anyone, least of all Claire, but it was mine. Proof that I had built something out of nothing, piece by piece, dollar by dollar. I sat back, the weight of Nora's words still pressing in my ears. You've still got fight in you. And that's when I remembered. Out on the coast, just beyond town, sat an abandoned inn. Once long ago, it had been the pride of the harbor, a white clapboard building with a wraparound porch where families stayed in summer, where laughter used to spill out onto the salt air. Claire and I had passed it often when she was a little girl. She'd point to it in wonder, whispering, "One day I want to stay there, Mama." Now it was boarded up, sagging into the cliffs, forgotten. But when I closed my eyes, I could almost see it alive again. Light in the windows, the porch swing swaying, a place not of abandonment but of belonging. And in that moment I decided, if my daughter thought I was a burden, then I would prove her wrong in the loudest silence I could manage. I would take that forgotten inn and breathe it back to life, not just for me, not just for her, but for every woman who had ever been told she no longer mattered. The weeks that followed blurred into sweat and salt air. My hands blistered from scrubbing walls, my back ached from hauling lumber, but each stroke of paint, each nail driven into tired beams stitched me back together. Neighbors began to notice. A retired fisherman stopped by with spare shingles. 2 college kids on summer break offered to sand the porch rails. Even Nora came with her apron still on, wielding a paintbrush like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. Slowly, the old inn began to breathe again. The clapboard walls gleamed white under the sun. The wraparound porch no longer sagged, but stood proud, welcoming. Inside, the kitchen smelled of lemon oil and fresh bread, not mildew. And when I lit the lanterns one evening, their glow spilled across the harbor like a heartbeat returned. I stood back on the cliff road, staring at the building I'd nearly given up on, now shining against the sea breeze. I pulled out my phone, lifted it, and snapped one picture. The inn, alive again. No caption, no explanation. I sent it to Claire. It didn't take 5 minutes. My phone buzzed, her name lighting up the screen. Mom, her voice was sharp, almost trembling. Why did you send me that photo, that place? It looks like home. I interrupted softly. There was silence on the other end. Did you actually rebuild it? She whispered. Yes, I said, my voice steady, calm. The inn you always loved, the one you said you'd stay in one day. Another pause, then her voice cracked. Why would you do that? I looked out at the glowing windows, the porch swing creaking in the wind. Because Claire, I answered, you called me a burden, so I decided to build something too heavy for you to ignore. And before she could respond, I ended the call. For the first time in years, the balance had shifted. The first strike had landed. 2 days later, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel road outside the inn. I was polishing the banister when the front door creaked open. Claire stepped inside, heels clicking against the newly restored floorboards. Her perfect blouse was wrinkled, her eyes red-rimmed like she hadn't slept. She stopped in the middle of the lobby, staring up at the lantern light swaying above. You really did this, she whispered. Yes, I said, setting the cloth down. I told you just because you abandoned me doesn't mean I was finished. Her jaw tightened, but instead of anger, her voice came soft. Mom, there's something I never told you. I felt the air in the room grow heavy. Go on, I said carefully. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling. Dad, he tried to come back. My breath caught. What? She nodded quickly, words tumbling out. After he left, when I was a teenager, he called. He wrote. He even showed up once right outside this very inn when it was still open. He wanted to see us, wanted to make things right, but her voice broke. I told him to leave. My knees nearly gave out. You mean? I told him we didn't need him, Claire blurted, tears spilling. I thought I was protecting you. I hated him for leaving you to struggle, and I was furious. So I shut the door in his face. I never told you because I thought you'd never forgive me. For decades, I had carried abandonment like a scar carved into bone. And now, standing in the glow of lantern light, my daughter was telling me I had been lied to. That the man I thought had erased me had actually tried. You let me believe I wasn't worth coming back for, I whispered, my voice trembling. You let me carry that pain alone. Claire sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I was young, angry. I thought I was strong enough to protect you, but all I did was steal your choice. The room tilted, the weight of her words crushing me. Grief and fury twisted together until I could barely breathe. It wasn't just my husband who'd left. It was my daughter who had decided I'd been left. And that truth broke something inside me I didn't know was still fragile. Claire's confession hung in the air like smoke after a fire. I gripped the edge of the counter, my voice low but sharp enough to cut. You let me believe I was abandoned. You watched me carry that weight alone for decades. Her tears fell fast, but her voice rose, shaking. I was 16, Mom. I was furious. He left us. I saw you breaking every day, working yourself raw. I thought if I shut him out, I was protecting you. I stepped forward, the words spilling hot from my chest. Protecting me? Claire, you didn't protect me. You stole my right to choose. You decided I wasn't worth the truth. You let me live in a lie that broke me over and over again. Her hands clenched at her sides, her voice cracking into a shout. And what about me? Do you think it was easy for me? I grew up watching you sacrifice everything, your sleep, your joy, your life. Every achievement I had felt like a debt I could never repay. Every failure felt like I was dragging you down. I hated Dad for leaving, but I hated you too, for making me the reason you had nothing left for yourself. The words hit like blows. I stumbled, tears blurring my vision. You called me a burden, Claire. After all I gave you, after every night I worked so you could rise higher, you dared to call me that. Her voice broke, raw and jagged. Because I couldn't face the truth. Because every time I looked at you, I saw what my choices cost you. I was drowning in guilt, and instead of admitting it, I pushed you away. I thought if I made you small, I could escape the weight of what I'd done. The lobby walls seemed to shake with our voices, echoes bouncing like ghosts of all the unsaid words from years past. Finally, I steadied myself, my voice dropping into steel. No more. I am not your shame, Claire. I am not your burden. I am your mother, and you will never erase me again. Her shoulders crumpled as if the words knocked the air from her lungs. She sank onto a bench, burying her face in her hands, sobbing not like a polished businesswoman, but like the girl I once held through thunderstorms. And just like that, the silence of 30 years shattered into pieces. That night, the inn was quiet, not the hollow quiet of abandonment, but the kind that waits, like the sea holding its breath before the tide rolls in. Claire didn't leave. She curled up on one of the half-finished beds, too tired to pretend anymore. And in the morning, I found her in the kitchen, hair loose, sleeves rolled, clumsily kneading dough with flour all over her manicured hands. "I don't know how to fix us," she said softly, "but maybe I can start here." For the first time in years, I saw not the polished woman in boardrooms, but the little girl who used to sit on the counter and beg to lick the frosting spoon. So we worked side by side, scrubbing floors, painting walls, airing out linens until they smelled like sunshine. Curious neighbors wandered in to help. Nora brought a tray of scones, declaring the inn finally had good bones again. Laughter returned to the halls, not polished but real. Weeks turned into months. The inn became more than a building, it became a refuge. Women who had been discarded by their families, widows with nowhere to go, teachers and nurses like me who had given their lives to others until no one remembered their names. They found beds here, meals here, dignity here. We called it Harbor Rest. On opening night, the lobby was filled with folding chairs, mismatched lanterns, and voices rising like hymns. Claire stood at the front, her hands trembling as she spoke. My mother raised me with grit and sacrifice. I once called her a burden, but she gave me back more than a home. She gave me back myself. This inn exists because of her, and tonight I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a second chance. The room fell silent. Then came the applause, loud, unrelenting, like the waves pounding the shore. I sat in the back, tears streaking down my cheeks. Not because I had won, but because I no longer needed to. Justice hadn't come in revenge. It came in rebuilding, one wall, one meal, one broken silence at a time. That night, as we locked the doors and the lanterns glowed behind us, Claire slipped her arm through mine. "Home isn't where you get kept out," she whispered. "It's where someone chooses you back in." I leaned against her, tired but lighter than I'd been in decades. And for the first time in years, I believed her.